A lone seeker enters an abandoned workshop, soot on the stones, a cracked crucible, and diagrams drawn like prayers. The promise is simple and impossible. Change the nature of a thing without destroying the thing itself. In the old manuals, it is written as metallurgy. In lived experience, it feels like a question of the soul. For centuries, the art pretended to be a craft of furnaces and flasks, yet its real subject was always transformation, how the chaotic, reactive mind becomes stable, how desire becomes direction, how suffering becomes meaning. The modern viewer meets the first riddle immediately. Were these practitioners early chemists who lacked instruments, or careful cartographers of inner life who hid psychology inside matter? The tradition didn't appear in isolation. It moved across centuries like a concealed transmission temple, to library, monastery to court, manuscript to private notebook. Early sources credit Haran the thrice-crowned, a semi-mythic teacher said to have fused Nile-era ritual with Greek reasoning, leaving texts where inner ascent and material practice are deliberately entangled. A brief tablet text repeats a core law: what happens in the unseen is echoed in the seen, and vice versa. Later, a rebellious physician, Aurelius of Basel, rejected the idea that the body is separate from spirit. For him, healing demanded both method and moral refinement. He framed the art through three principles: the fixed, the fiery, and the fluid, not merely chemicals, but lenses for understanding change. Much later still, Dr. Kellen read the old images and recognized an encrypted psychology. The adepts were often recording inner transformation, using matter as camouflage. The problem is not that modern people lack intelligence. It's that we keep reading a symbolic language as if it were only literal. Remove the theater of secret furnaces and the claim becomes simple. The great work is not mainly the turning of lead into gold, but the turning of a fragmented person into a unified one. The furnace is sustained attention. The vessel is your life habits, ethics, and discipline. The materials are inner content: fear, compulsion, longing, resentment, brilliance, devotion. That is why the old manuals speak in doubles. They describe chemical operations, but demand qualities like patience, secrecy, precision, and humility. Those aren't just laboratory virtues. They are virtues of consciousness. The adepts knew that if the operator is unstable, the work produces fantasy and self-deception. If the operator is steady, the same symbols become a map. In modern psychological language, this is the movement from a performed identity into a fuller self where disowned traits are faced, recovered, and integrated. The stone is not a mineral. It is the inner center that remains when the war between conscious intention and unconscious pressure finally ends. The art starts with a three-part structure that keeps repeating across traditions because it matches lived reality. The adepts called these principles the fixed, the fiery, and the fluid. Names change, the function doesn't. The fixed is structure and containment, boundaries, routine, memory, and the ability to endure discomfort without collapsing. It is what makes you reliable to yourself. Without it, the process spills everywhere and becomes chaos. The fiery is desire and identity, the heat that drives choices, loyalty, ambition, and passion. It can power courage and devotion, but it also fuels obsession, defensiveness, and conflict. If the fiery runs the system alone, life becomes pure reaction. The fluid is mediation and transformation, the messenger that moves between opposites, instinct and insight, feeling and meaning. When it activates, the psyche starts generating bridges, dreams, symbols, sudden reframes that connect what used to be split. The great work fails when one principle dominates. It succeeds when all three cooperate. You can see the three forces in any real attempt to change. The fixed is your structure, the boundary, the schedule, the discipline that keeps a promise when you don't feel like it. The fiery is drive and appetite, what makes you pursue a new life or sabotage it. The fluid is translation, the capacity to notice a pattern, name it, and choose differently. Most people transform using only one principle. Some overbuild the fixed, rigid routines, perfectionism, harsh control. They become stable but brittle. Others worship the fiery, motivation, intensity, endless, starting over. They burn hot, then burn out. Others dissolve into the fluid. Constant introspection, symbolism, spiritual fascination, movement without embodiment. The adepts insisted on balance because change isn't a mood, it's a system. Strengthen the fixed by cleaning the vessel, sleep, order, honest commitments. Aim the fiery by clarifying what you actually want, not what impulse demands. Invite the fluid through attention, silence, journaling, dream recall, so the unconscious can speak without taking the throne. When all three cooperate, pressure becomes information and suffering becomes instruction. Old texts repeat the same warning: keep the vessel sealed. Literally, that's chemistry. Psychologically, it means don't turn the work into a performance. If you announce transformation too early, you start living for witnesses. You trade real change for the soothing image of change. The seal also guards against the classic danger: inner inflation. When unconscious material rises, it can feel like revelation, destiny, even holiness. The ego then claims the experience as proof of superiority. That is not awakening. It is costume. A sealed process forces private testing. Does this make you humbler? More responsible, more honest in relationships? If not, it's smoke. Secrecy doesn't mean isolation. It means containment. Work with a therapist, mentor, or one trusted person who prioritizes truth over your persona. But keep the center of gravity in action, not narration. The proof is always practical: steadier attention, cleaner ethics, fewer compulsions, stronger courage. This is why patience is central. Structural change is slow, and that slowness is what makes it real. After the triad, the manuals lay out a sequence of operations, 7 movements that describe a full cycle of inner change. Schools rename them, but the arc stays consistent: breakdown, liquefaction, discernment, union, ignition, refinement, embodiment. Treat this as a pattern, not a motivational checklist. Each stage creates the conditions for the next. Skip one and the work distorts: repression posing as discipline, obsession posing as devotion, fantasy posing as insight. The imagery is severe for a reason. Transformation is severe on the parts of you that survive through illusion. The work doesn't merely add better habits. It dismantles the false identity that clings to comfort, approval, and control. And that identity will resist with every tactic available: rationalization, distraction, sudden exhaustion, even moral panic. So we proceed like the adepts: calm, exact, and unsentimental. We start where every genuine change starts, by applying heat to what you thought was solid, until only what can endure remains. The first operation is the burning heat applied until the false parts cannot hold. In the old furnace, the unstable burns away and only residue remains. In inner work, it's the breakdown of a persona. This is where change feels like collapse. The identity that once protected you, competent, pleasing, in control, starts to fail. Old coping stops working. Your usual story loses credibility. You may feel exposed, restless, or suddenly unable to tolerate a life that looked acceptable from the outside. The burning isn't punishment. It's friction that reveals truth. It happens when your ideals meet your habits, when your self-image meets your real choices. Sometimes the heat is crisis. Sometimes it's one clean moment of clarity. I've been living a script. The aim is simple: discover what remains when the mask burns off. What's real enough to build on. After the burning comes the flooding. The residue is placed into water. What was fixed becomes fluid. Psychologically, this is the rise of unconscious material into daily awareness. People recognize it by its signatures, vivid dreams, old memories resurfacing, emotional waves that feel disproportionate, sudden sensitivity to symbols, pattern, and meaning. The mind grows less armored, categories blur. You may feel more alive and more exposed at the same time. This is why the old writers obsessed over the vessel. Without containment, flooding becomes fragmentation. The person mistakes intensity for truth, gets swallowed by old stories, or turns inner turmoil into confused spiritual certainty. That is not a moral failure. It's a technical failure. Too much solvent, too little structure. Done correctly, flooding has one purpose: soften what was rigid so it can be reformed. It loosens buried grief, denied anger, hidden motives, unlived desire. The goal isn't to indulge every feeling. The goal is motion. So what was frozen can be seen, worked, and transformed. Flooding creates a mixed solution: insight and fantasy, pain and power, truth and contamination. The third operation is the sorting, the return of discernment. You separate what is genuinely yours from what was installed in you. Here you spot foreign programs, inherited fears posing as instinct, family roles mistaken for personality, cultural scripts mistaken for fate. You also meet the shadow concretely specific traits you denied or exiled: anger, envy, erotic desire, ambition, need, tenderness, the hunger to be seen. Some of this is medicine. Some is poison. Sorting demands double attention. You feel the content, but you also watch it. You ask, is this energy creative or destructive? Does it increase responsibility or reduce it? Does it make me more honest or more performative? The adepts treated this as technical discrimination: keep what strengthens the work, remove what corrupts it. In modern terms, it's analysis plus testing. You name the pattern, trace its origin, then verify in daily behavior, because insight without action is only another dream. After sorting comes union. Opposites that once felt like enemies are brought into relationship. The old art called it the sacred marriage: sun and moon, king and queen, fire and water. Psychologically, it is integration. Integration isn't being positive. It's becoming whole. Strength without tenderness hardens into cruelty. Tenderness without strength collapses into helplessness. Discipline without desire becomes deadness. Desire without discipline becomes chaos. The opposites aren't mistakes to eliminate. They are polarities to hold. At this stage, the psyche starts building bridges. You may suddenly understand a wound that has driven your choices. You may feel compassion for a part of yourself you despised. You may realize that certain virtues were defenses and certain flaws carried the energy you actually need. Union is uncomfortable because the ego loves clean identities. The work demands a higher logic, both the hind instead of either she or, when opposites can coexist without war. Energy stops leaking into inner conflict and becomes available for presence, creativity, and ethical clarity. Until now, the ego can pretend it's in control. The fifth operation introduces the ferment, a spark that changes the work from self-improvement into something deeper. In the old language, a living agent enters the mixture and alters it beyond what effort alone can produce. Psychologically, this is the activation of an inner organizing force. You can prepare the ground, but you can't command the arrival. It often appears as a sudden reordering of priorities. A clean insight that cuts through confusion or coincidences that feel strangely timed. The world doesn't become magical. Your attention becomes coherent enough to see pattern. Two errors wait here: cynicism, dismissing everything meaningful and closing the channel; credulity, treating every coincidence as prophecy and inflating the ego. The correct stance is disciplined openness. Receive the signal, test it with ethics, confirm it through action. The ferment doesn't crown you. It burdens you. Once you see, you are responsible to live differently. After ferment comes refinement, repeated cycles that purify what has awakened. The old image is simple heat, rise, cool, return again and again. Psychologically, this is repetition with awareness, coming back to the essential until it becomes stable. This is where people drift, because it's not dramatic. The ego wants a single revelation. The work demands cycles. You meet the same triggers with sharper sight, the same fears with steadier breath, the same self-deceptions, but they stop tasting sweet. Each return removes a thin layer of confusion. In practice, refinement is daily discipline. Meditation is refinement, returning attention until the mind steadies. Contemplation is refinement, cleansing motive until it becomes clean. Journaling is refinement, catching rationalizations until honesty becomes automatic. Even difficult conversations can be refinement if you stop performing and tell the truth. The metric isn't intensity. It's clarity and consistency. Over time, the scattered mind gathers, the reactive self loosens, and the inner center becomes less of an event and more of a way of living. The last operation is embodiment, fixing what was volatile so it can hold shape in real life. The old books call it making the stone. Psychologically, it's when insight becomes character. Most people get flashes during crisis, meditation, love, grief, then return to the same habits. Embodiment means the new center survives the ordinary bills, conflict, boredom, temptation. You stop being split oneself that knows, another that sabotages. The evidence is concrete. Your system steadies. You pause before reacting. Your ethics simplify because inner contradiction weakens. You can choose without constant self-betrayal. You can set boundaries without cruelty. You can feel emotion without being possessed by it. This is the real gold, not a high, but a durable presence. You become harder to manipulate because you no longer bargain with your shadow in secret. You become more useful because you're less ruled by need. The work doesn't remove pain from life, it removes the extra suffering created by fragmentation. The master formula is simple. Prepare the vessel, apply heat, allow the flood, sort what emerges, unite opposites. Receive the ferment, refine in cycles, embody the result. The great work is lawful change, inner transformation that becomes lived structure. This is where the path touches Gnostic Christianity, not belief as a label, but awakening as knowledge. To recognize the inner rulers that program your fear and desire, to stop obeying their script, and to return to the spark of awareness that cannot be owned. The practice is concrete. Choose one arena: relationships, work, compulsion, anxiety. Seal the vessel, stop announcing change. Burn, admit what is failing. Flood, let feelings, dreams, and memories rise without acting them out. Sort, keep what strengthens, discard what corrupts. Unite, hold paradox without panic. Ferment, allow the deeper reordering. Refine daily. Embody through action. The gold is not in the crucible. It is in the will that lights the fire and the courage to remain until the stone holds.